introduce myself? My name is Councillor Cathy Scott. I'm the leader of Kirklees Council and the newly appointed chair. So you have to be patient with me. I'm new to this, but we will get through it. Can I remind everybody today that it is being broadcast and streamed? Anybody that does enter a room are consenting to being filmed. So if we move on, can I ask Miles Larrington to tell us of any absences, please?
Apologies for absence have been received from Nikki Davis, Martin Hathaway, Councillor Imran Khan and Dr Peter O'Brien, Chair.
Thank you for that. I presume there's going to be some late arrivals, so hopefully they'll get here. So as we move on, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to be declared? If you do have them, can you ensure that you actually provide us with those? But I'll actually I'm not too sure who it is. Did you indicate to speak? No. Okay. So I think before we go any further, I think an introduction might be in order because I'm not familiar with a lot of people in the room. So I'll start from my right.
Shirley Condon, Vice-Chancellor, University of Bradford, and supporting Councillor Scott as the Deputy Chair.
Miles Larrington, Committee Services Officer.
Good afternoon, Councillor Eleanor Thompson from Leeds City Council. Councillor Joe Hepworth from Wakefield City Council.
Good afternoon, Milton Brown, CEO of Kirklees Local TV as a private sector representative.
Good afternoon, Tim Craven, Private Sector Representative.
Good afternoon, Alex Miles, Managing Director of Yorkshire Learning Providers.
Peter Glover, Research and Intelligence at the Combined Authority.
Pippa Stiers, Adult Skills Manager at the Combined Authority.
Sonia Ridgely, Employment Skills Policy Lead for the Combined Authority.
Sharon Riding, Strategic Partnership Manager for DWP. Caroline Townsley, Western North Yorkshire Chamber, representing Martin Hathaway from Mid Yorkshire Chamber.
Natasha Barber Evans, CEO of Better Connect, representing the BCSE sector.
Phil Day, West Yorkshire Skills Project Worker, representing TUC.
Colin Booth, I'm CEO of Luminate Education Group, representing further education colleges.
Thank you. So we're moving on for item 3. Are there any possible exclusion from the press and the public? And there are no items on this agenda for that. So we'll move on to item 4, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 19th of October. Can we agree these minutes, or is there any amendments you wish to have? I take that as you're supporting these minutes? Yes? Okay, they're moved. So I'll just give you a quick update regarding the UKSP Pillar 3. People of the skills bid was on the 12th of January. There's a good number of applications that have come through and which are currently being assessed, and we'll be able to share you more information soon. So there will be a timeline on that, and that will be brought back to you. There's also about level 4 devolution that should have gone through the committee. Is there anything else on that really that needs to be highlighted? So it's gone through the committee.
Timescales for a response to level 4 devolution framework didn't allow for a detailed discussion here. But the Combined Authority and local authorities have been working closely together to understand the implications of the level 4 devolution framework, which was published late in 2023, and at the end of January they submitted a letter to government that sought to progress in all areas of the level 4 devolution framework, which for this committee will be particularly interested, included further commitment to a more devolved adult skills system, particularly with increased flexibility on adult skills programmes, and to enable local areas to be central conveners of careers provision in their regions. Although it's important to note that the full detail is actually contingent and dependent on the outcome and the implementation of trailblazer deals elsewhere in the country.
So thank you for that. There's also the Work Well programme that appears to be going really well. We're working closely with West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board and the job centres, the Combined Authority and local authorities. We have submitted an application to deliver the Government Work Well programme in West Yorkshire. So that's a good news programme for us as well. Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay, so we're going to move on to item 6, I believe, and it's Peter Glover that's going to be introducing the economic and sector reporting.
Thank you, Chair. So I have some slides which I'm going to attempt to bring up. Okay. So the purpose of this item is to provide some context around current emerging labour market trends to inform the discussions of the committee. So there's a lot of content in the paper and the supporting appendix, so I don't propose to go through it all. I'm going to focus on some specific items within the papers where we have new data or where there's been some notable change. But obviously I'm happy to answer any questions on any aspect of the paper. So the three areas I'm going to focus on are the real living wage, apprenticeships, and also the general situation in the labour market, which I think shows continued evidence of sort of softening and cooling of labour market conditions. So I'm going to kick off with the real living wage aspect, and you'll find a slide on page 20 of your pack, which is also up on screen, which deals with this. And this real living wage is of interest to us because it links into the Mayor's Fair Work Charter, and also, so that means it's a key dimension of quality work. Pay obviously is, but also it's the benchmark that we use within the adult education budget to determine whether somebody's low paid and therefore eligible for preferential access to provision. So we can update on the real living wage because new data has recently been published by an ONS. Just to give you a quick bit of background on the living wage, the Living Wage Foundation's real living wage is independently calculated based on what people need to get by and to meet everyday needs. And the level that was set at the time the data was collected that I'm presenting here was £10.90 per hour. It's actually gone up to £12 since then. So the proportion of jobs paying below the real living wage was 14% in 2023, and that in West Yorkshire, and that equates to 131,000 jobs falling below the threshold across West Yorkshire. It's slightly above the national average of 13%, and it's little changed in 2023 in West Yorkshire compared with 2022, but it's around 4 percentage points lower than in 2021. And I think it's fair to say the inflationary surge we've seen hasn't impacted on the real living wage, on the proportion of jobs below the real living wage as much as we probably anticipated, but these figures are still for sort of April 2023. You can see that there's a mixed picture at local authority level, so Kirklees and Bradford have the highest proportion of jobs paying below the real living wage, Calderdale and Leeds the lowest, and Wakefield's in the middle. I've not presented it in this chart, but there are important messages linked to the sex and status of workers. So women are much more likely to be paid below the real living wage than men. So 18% of women and 11% of men. And that's primarily because women are much more likely to work part-time. So there are big differences between the hourly rate of pay or the proportion of jobs falling below the real living wage on that basis. So 8% of full-time jobs below the real living wage, but 33% of part-time jobs below the real living wage. And male part-time workers are paid the worst of all, so 36% of jobs for that group are paid below the real living wage. So the second area that I'd like to focus on is relating to apprenticeships, and you can find the relevant slides in pages 24 to 26 of your pack. So since the last meeting of the committee, new data has become available for the 2022 to 23 academic year, so I'm briefly going to go through that. And of course, apprenticeships are important to us because they provide a route into a sustainable career for individuals and also a source of technical skills to meet employer needs. So I think the key message here is that the post-pandemic recovery in apprenticeship starts has largely stalled in 22-23. So there were 15,793 apprenticeship starts during that academic year, but that represents a very small fall of about 56 compared with the previous year, whereas at national level starts grew by 3%, which is still low growth, of course. So the level of starts in 22-23 was around 3,000, or 16% below its level in 2018-19 before the pandemic. So there's still a lot of ground to recover. As you can see from the slide on page 24, there have been declines at all levels except for higher level apprenticeships, and a decline for all age groups except for a small degree of growth for under 19s. Higher apprenticeships are the only segment to follow an upward trend throughout the period that we're looking at here, and that's partly due to the influence of the levy. But what you can also see is a big decrease in intermediate apprenticeships over the period. On slide 25, you can see the picture for subject areas. And there was a growth for a few subject areas, so health, public services and care and ICT both grew. But most subject areas are still below their pre-pandemic level, with a few exceptions, including ICT and construction. But you can see that business administration and law is well below pre-pandemic levels. At local authority level, it's a mixed picture as well. So you can see a small degree of growth for Bradford and Kirklees, but varying degrees of decline for the others, and they're all still well below pre-pandemic levels. So what I'd like to move on to now is the evidence I mentioned of the cooling of the labour market. I think there's a range of evidence supports that view. The slides that relate to this in your pack are on pages 27 to 34. And of course, this situation has an important implications, for example, in terms of demand for employment support services, the demands placed upon AEB by, say, an increase in unemployed workers, and also demand for apprenticeships and other programmes. What I would say is that it appears we reached a turning point in the economy and local labour market in July of last year. But I'm not going to explore the data in too much detail, but what we can see from the first few slides is, first of all, a slowing of employment growth and a sort of flattening since the summer. We can also, and that applies across local authority districts, and we can also see a moderation of pay growth, although that data is a little bit inconclusive. And we can also see a fairly modest uptick in the claimant count, the count of people who are claiming benefits primarily because they're unemployed. But for me, the real bellwether indicator is the downturn in vacancies that we can see reflected in the count of online job postings. The trend was very robust from early 2021 up until recent months, but you can see that it's fallen quite sharply since then. And what we can also see is that that decline is now spreading across the full range of occupational categories. So the occupations that have seen the sharpest falls are areas like information technology, which saw really big increases during the pandemic and the aftermath, but they're now declining back to sort of normal levels, if you like. But we can also see that occupations like hospitality and tourism as well are starting to see decline. So what I'd caveat this also by saying that the labour market is still strong in historic terms. So we compare, pre-pandemic, before the sort of boom that we saw from 2021 onwards, and may well stabilise. But it is something that we need to keep a sort of an eye on. So that's it from me, Chair. Back to you.
Thank you. Is there any comments on that paper? Yes.
I'd just like to highlight something that Peter didn't cover, but is in the paper, that West Yorkshire's prevalence of young people who are neat or not in employment, education or training, which is above the national average in Bradford and particularly above the national average in Leeds, which at 9.2% is in a small group of the worst NEET figures in the country now in terms of local authorities. My concern is that that figure is likely to go up next year. It's not because of a lack of engagement, it's because of a lack of appropriate places in post-16 education in Leeds in particular. So it's a fundamental planning issue, not an engagement issue.
Okay, Peter, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I think we've discussed this at previous meetings, but it is an important point to raise. The next set of data, NEAT data, should be available quite shortly. So the kind of benchmark period that is used each year is December to February. So obviously we're getting towards the middle of February now. So we should have a updated position so we can see, whether things have worsened. So, but yeah, obviously it's a really key point.
Okay, so Peter? Yes.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say that Forum Central have just done a workforce pressures survey, actually as of January 2024, which is in respect of VCSE organisations. They are struggling, and this survey basically identifies staff retention as being a major challenge, high turnover rates. You have some VCSE sector organisations having to dip into reserves to survive. So I just wanted to highlight them as a major contributor to actually supporting economically inactive adults. The healthcare, so we talk about work well, I think the VCSE sector can really add huge amounts of value, but this survey was quite eye-opening in terms of the sector struggling as well.
Can I just briefly come back on what Pete said? It'd be great to look at the current data. That's looking in the rearview mirror, and it may be the same, it may be slightly more, it may be slightly less. Looking forwards, until we resolve the planning issue, the number of needs will grow.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah, just on that, particularly in Leeds and Bradford, like you said, but while we've got local authority representatives here, it's worth mentioning that it is absolutely a planning issue. Doors are shut and there's not enough neat provision available for young people. The DfE's response is very adamant that they won't go back out to procurement, so what you've got in your districts is what you've got, but what they absolutely will do is support growth, but that growth has to be initiated by the local authority. So I think it's important to raise that the local authorities are really the gatekeepers to making sure that there is more neat provision and funding that can go into the districts. Doesn't super help the colleges if your places are full, but there are alternative providers that could provide that could get growth, but it needs to be led by the local authority. So the DfE will support growth, they won't support new, but it's the local authorities that are the gatekeepers to that growth. So I think that's worth mentioning.
Thank you. Just one thing, Peter, that I wanted to mention is point 2.6 about the reader technical issues on the ONS data set. Which data is the right one to monitor, and is it can we rely on it, basically?
Just bear with me while I find the relevant bit of the pack. Yeah, so there have been issues with the labour force survey, which is the source of much of the labour market data that's available, both at national and local level, and ONS have been making improvements to that. There have been issues, so I guess what I'm suggesting is that there's a need to kind of calibrate both of the labour force survey based data with the HMRC data and use both of those to kind of get an impression of what the picture is. But hopefully the ONS data is going to improve now that they've made the improvements to boost the sample sizes and correct the sort of non-response bias that's affected the data.
Thank you for that, Peter. Is there any further questions? Any more? Yes.
Yeah, it's really a point about, well, 2 points really. One about the comments on the apprenticeship programmes and the decline, generally the decline. And I'm sure Colin and Alex and my colleague Tim might have something to add to this point, but I do wonder whether it would be helpful for us to do some sort of combined view of, is that a problem with generating demand from employers and or is it something to do with mismatch? I know from a higher education perspective, most universities are still interested in delivering apprenticeship programs where they can get the volume of demand to make sure that it's going to be cost effective to run. But we spend quite a lot of time with employers trying to engage in discussions on that, and it's quite challenging.
Can I invite Tim in?
Not speaking on behalf of the University of Huddersfield, but noting the outstanding apprenticeship Ofsted outcome recently for the University of Huddersfield, I would second what Shirley says about the challenges of working, particularly with smaller to medium-sized employers for most HEIs. That's not through lack of willingness on the part of HEIs, it's the inflexibilities of the system, and I know this has been said so many times, but it's worth saying again. We are looking forward, obviously, potentially to policy change that might bring more flexibility in the use of the levy, and I know HEIs are looking to that in advance.
Thank you, Tim. Yes.
Yeah, so just Tim's correct. The system is extremely difficult for employers to negotiate. So in the end, it's employer demands that's the problem. But employer demand, you look further into that, and employer demand is impacted on by the complexity of the system. The other comment, when you look at the data, I suppose asks the question, what do we want from the apprenticeship system? Because if you look at the numbers of apprentices, then I'm sure Tim and Shirley would agree, you can see the number of higher level apprenticeships has been going up very strongly, and that's been a priority in the system. What that means is the number of lower level apprentices has been going down. So there's a question about what we want from the system as well. I think everybody would agree that the way the bureaucracy works needs to be simplified, but then we need some clear policy statements on what is the system.
We need to do lots more, unlike the training providers and unlike the colleges. So I think they are in listening mode for the first time in a long time. So use that opportunity, HEIs, while you've got their ear, and CAs, while you have their ear, because I do think we can now more than ever shape and change the landscape of apprenticeship. I don't think it's an employer demand issue. I think it's a long-winded system.
Yeah, thanks for your comments.
I mean, it might be helpful if maybe through Yorkshire universities and the combined authority together we could produce something that we would want to send in terms of a bit of pressure to the DFE.
Okay, is there any further comments?
Could I just make one?
Shirley?
Just one final comment, just on the presentation and the forward-looking point that Colin mentioned. I was just struck by the point, the neat position, but also when you look at the other slide, slide 21, the real living wage slide, the lack of pay growth, etc., etc. Collectively, it's all pointing to a real need for us to have a really strong focus on our young people stronger. So I know Colin mentioned that point about planning, but it's what else can we bring to bear? When we see it in the round, it's pretty miserable.
Yes.
No, I think that's a really valid point, and I'd just like to say we've been fortunate within the TUC West Yorkshire to get funding from Combined Authority to employ a Fair Work Charter project worker, and the 5 pillars that were in the Fair Work Charter, part of their remit will be to go out and support that real living wage increase and think around all those aspects. And it's not just the direct union elements within those 5 pillars, it's also the learning side of things and negotiating and recognition and things like that. So I think that's a really, really valid point.
Because we'll probably find that a lot of our young people and those who are categorised as needs are probably living in families that are below the real living wage, etc., etc. Families involved.
Thank you. Peter, thanks for your time and effort spent on this paper. It's really appreciated. So we'll go on to item 7, the skills system review, and I'll invite Michelle Burton in to present this paper.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you very much, Chair. So this committee will be really aware of a lot of the strategic work that's already taken place on the employment and skills agenda. So we have an employment and skills framework which was published in 2021, which feels like an awfully long time ago. And while a lot of the kind of context and the priorities set out in that framework remain really current, the context has changed quite a lot. Following on from the discussion we've had, not least the role of combined authorities in the system, but also things like apprenticeship levy policy and future devolution as well. We also, of course, hosted in West Yorkshire an independent Future Ready Skills Commission, which considered in great detail how the employment and skills system could better work in a devolved context, and I've included as a reminder in the paper in an appendix some of the recommendations from that commission. As the pace of change and regional, particularly regional local influence over the employment and skills system is developing so quickly, particularly in the context of potential Level 4 devolution framework that we summarised at the beginning, it's really timely to look at an operating model for employment and skills in West Yorkshire, particularly to give stakeholders the chance to move quickly when sometimes developments don't allow that thinking to take place then. So point to some of the timescales for, we've summarised Work Well as a really good example where the timescales are really short. So it seems really timely to look at an operating model for employment and skills. We have a real mix of regionally led activity, that some of which, of course, the adult education budget is fully devolved. Others we'd characterise as being delegated at regional levels. So, they're fully, the rules are fully formed and then passed down to be implemented at regional level. And then others are contracted by national government. And operating models vary accordingly. With deeper devolution potentially imminent, it seems really timely to look at how we work together and the role of actors in this space. And linked to that, 4 of the local authority areas actually have employment and skills boards, which are constituted really differently, and they vary in their makeup, they vary in their scope, in how they're chaired, and this committee is asked to consider how best we can join up the governance with those groups, whether and how you would like them to be represented here, and whether it would be of benefit to see greater consistency in those local groups, both in terms of their terms of reference, their makeup, and their remit as well. So those and so the review of the skills system, this committee is made up to date with this update, and made aware that the intention is that will progress really quickly, with organisations being invited to deliver that work over the coming weeks.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I hope I'm going to say some things that are obvious. Yes, I would support there being a more logical and rational structure rather than a somewhat random one. Yes, it would be a good idea to have some standard terms of reference and a standard structure to each of the boards in the local areas. And to state the obvious as well, it doesn't make sense to have a local board in 4 local authorities, but not in the 5th one either. The other question in there relates to how that would report through to this board. So, speaking as the FE rep, we will be able to sort ourselves out. As long as there's an FE rep on each of the local authority level boards, then the FE colleges will sort themselves out and will feed back through myself and Nikki on this board, and probably directly to Michelle as well, outside of these meetings, through Joanne Patrickson, who I know you speak to quite frequently. So we'll sort ourselves out as long as there's a structure and some logic to it.
Jo.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, and then depending on your answer, I might have a follow-up comment. On 2.5 on page 36, the second bullet point, asking one of the chairs to represent the 4 boards on the committees. Could you expand on that a bit more for me, please?
So rather than just asking you as a committee, how would you like to engage with these groups, I thought I'd make some suggestions, but there may be others that you can think of. And one of those is that, so it is really important that we have the voice of local partnerships on this committee. We have got elected members on this committee. It could be that you feel that that is a role that the elected members can play to provide that conduit between the local employment and skills boards and this board.
Thank you. Yes, Jo.
Thank you. So reading on your report of this is that some councillors are involved in their skills committee. I know I am, I sit on my skills committee, but reading it others don't. So how will that transpire? Is that something that we have to put all councillors onto the skills committee, or can we just have someone from the skills committee on? Because it reads to me that one person will go forward and do it all on behalf of the other authorities, and I don't think that will work across the board, because my needs in Wakefield are very different to Leeds and different to Kirk Leeds and stuff like that, so there needs to be unified representation from every local authority, because something that's happening in Wakefield is very different to something that's happening in Leeds. Thank you.
That's really helpful. That's exactly the question. Yeah, is whether we need an additional rep from each board, or whether the local, whether the elected members on this committee could provide that already. Each local authority is represented by a political leadership here, or whether we need 5 additional members on this. But that's exactly the question.
Do you want to come back, Jo?
Sorry, yeah, something I feel passionate about is this. So, because I don't do this full time as in skills and education, I think that my officer would be beneficial in this role to report back of what they're doing as a day in, day out job, because she knows what she's doing, and that is her sole focus is skills and education in Wakefield. And I think that's the best person to report back to this board, because you might have a follow-up question about what we're doing in Wakefield on this issue, and I haven't got a clue about it, because that's not what I do day in, day out. I have a very small snapshot of skills and education, and her job is that forward. So I think an officer who, she does chair our skills and education in Wakefield as well, is the best person to come and report back and answer everyone's questions of what's happening in Wakefield or elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Shirley, did you want to come?
Yeah, I think this points to the original sort of position of we should have some regularity across these boards in the various regions, because it's highlighting difference already, isn't it? Yeah. But I was going to just say something from a Bradford perspective, that they do have one of these boards. It's quite effective. It's not chaired by the councillor. It's chaired by an independent person actually, but the officers are represented there. And I think the feel that I'm getting from Bradford, not that I want to speak for the elected representative, but that they would probably be a lot more to your thinking, that it wouldn't necessarily have to be the elected officer, but we might need to get some consistency there.
Does anybody else want to add into that, or is it something that we need to take away and talk to you individually, that you can actually fill into that?
Yeah, it'd be worth seeing the terms of reference for each one, just to understand what are the differences before deciding whether that's the right path. It sounds eminently sensible to have that, but my concern is always, and I've seen this happen before, the levels of engagement in each of those boards. Would they be on board with doing that, and would it be as effective then if it is effective? But anyway, seeing the terms of reference would be a great starting point.
Thank you. Did anybody else want to come back in it, Colin?
Yeah, can I just check something? Really, it's what power this committee has. So, is it up to this committee to agree some standard structure and terms of reference, and then ask each of the local authorities to implement that? And if it is, then I'd like to see a draft at this meeting that we can all have a look at and agree to.
Okay, I'm going to bring Michelle in there.
Well, that's why it was fairly carefully worded in paper, Colin. So no, I don't think it would be appropriate. So this committee has specific decision-making powers, and sort of telling local partnerships how to organise themselves isn't part of that. And I don't think that's what you'd want to be doing. But I'm sure that. But it is really important that we adequately and effectively have local partnerships voices reflected here. And so the local areas will be very keen to get your thoughts as a committee as to how they can best be reflected here. And I'm sure that if you had a strong view that you'd like to see greater standardisation, consistent terms of reference, they would listen to that.
So, in summary, we need to get all of the local boards to agree to standardisation individually.
But that's part of, yeah, so, and that's why I'm framing this as part of the review of the system. There's certainly the appetite to look at that.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
So I'm just going to bring Shirley back in.
Yeah, it's on another point really. The Mayor wrote to the Chancellor of Exchequer about devolution and with some asks, and it's just how that might be considered in the light of this.
Yeah, so that's absolutely the context here, isn't it? Is that the remit that this committee is responsible for is evolving so quickly, isn't it? With particular responsibilities around work and health, greater strategic influence around careers, but then of course greater asks as well over and above those. And we need, as a local partnership, there needs to be the ability to respond quickly as things change. The pace of change over the last couple of years has really been quite something, and so it is the time to reflect on kind of how we're organised, the decision making structures, our operating models, and that's Shelley's absolutely right. It's a really important part of the context.
Tim.
Yeah, thanks. It's an interesting discussion, this, in terms of the relationship between the districts and the combined authority. I think it's worth at least beginning to think through the implications. If we are thinking about a voluntary engagement with an agenda on terms of reference and membership, we need to think about other things too. So a lot of the material that this committee has been centrally involved in around the skills agenda in West Yorkshire doesn't refer to the ESBs, or it might only marginally refer to the ESBs. So there are lots of other agendas to align, not just simple terms of reference and membership. I think that might only be the first and simplest of the hurdles to get over.
Thank you, Tim. Colin.
So one of the comments, and I'll follow up on Tim's comment as well. Can I just then ask, just thinking about those relationships actually, so would it be appropriate to minute in this meeting a polite request to Leeds to say, would you like to consider setting up a board so that it's more consistent with the rest of the structure? And then following on from that, if we're going to get a standard set or a reasonably standard approach, would it be appropriate for this board to consider some very outlined terms of reference that they could recommend to all of the local structures? And then the third point that I've got, which is probably a bit more complex but nevertheless important, if we think about that whole structure then and how decisions and information flows through it, how do the local skills improvement partnerships relate to that? Presumably, well, I don't know. I don't know how they relate to this committee and then the local committees. I just don't know how that would work.
I do have the answer to that actually. So the previous chair of this committee wrote to the chair of the West Yorkshire Local Skills Improvement Partnership Board, asking for representative, and Martin Hathaway was put forward there, and Carolyn is attending in his stead today. So I'm confident that we have got that representation at a regional level. In terms, I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of all of the local employment and skills boards, but one that I am a member of certainly does have strong LSIP representation as well. But there's probably a mixed picture, I'd guess.
Yeah.
Just coming back on Colin's point about the terms of reference, I think for terms of reference for the skills, it's going to have to be a broad one, because my issues in Wakefield are very different elsewhere, and that's the thing, is like, although we'd like some uniformed reference across all the things, our makeups of our different authorities are very different. And so like further education and higher education, we've got one college that does higher education in all the Wakefield district, compared to Leeds, who've got 3-4 universities now, so and colleges and everything like that. So it's very different makeup that way. So what the terms of reference could be going for Leeds will not, most of them for higher education wouldn't apply to Wakefield, because we've only got at the moment one higher education provider.
Is there any further adding to that? No, just one of the notes that I actually had earlier was some consistency needs to be here about best practice. We have to ensure that it's the local governance of this and about the maturity of our partnership relationships as we go forward. So I think that's got to be really, really important as we move on. So it is about the skills review. It is about feeding into it. We've noted the comments about the terms of reference, but it's also about what's within this remit, this committee here. So, sorry. Yes.
No, I was a little bit late. I think it's really worth exploring across West Yorkshire. There's lots of government funding now that's coming down through the combined authority, which we want to make sure benefits all the individual local authorities. But it will come to a central point, and how that then is worked, and you agree how that's distributed and what provision might be delivered, needs to be through a combined route, I think. So from my experience, we've got universal support that's on track now. You've referenced Work Well already, and we've had the experience of Shared Prosperity Fund, which I think we've all found very challenging in the timeframes we've had. So I think it's really something that's worth exploring more, and I think there will be real benefits, both for a combined authority, but for each local authority as well.
Okay, so we've noted thanks for that, Michelle. I really appreciate the work and effort that's gone into that. So we're going to move on to item 8, digital skills. So I'm going to invite Sonia Midgley in to present the paper.
Thank you, Chair. This report is dual purpose. So firstly, we're seeking endorsement for the digital blueprint, which was actually presented in draft form at the last meeting, and I'd just like to thank members for their comments and contributions at the discussion at the last meeting. The draft report is very much in pre-design state. It's included in full at Appendix 1. And the second item that I'd also just like to bring to members' attention is around the progress of the Digital Skills Plan, which was published just over a year ago, and this committee was very valuable in helping us to develop the key aims within that plan, and also to make investments to help us make progress towards the actions that we'd identified in the plan. I'd like to start with that by highlighting that Appendix 2, we've detailed the actions that have been taken as a result of the investments overseen by this committee over the last 14 months. But in particular, I just want to highlight and draw your attention to point 2.11 in the report, which I think is a good news story for our region in terms of essential digital skills, which was one of the key indicators that we'd established of the digital skills plan, whereby how we were going to measure progress against. And you'll see that although the way that those figures have changed slightly, and they are collected at a Yorkshire and Humber level rather than at a West Yorkshire level, that's the lowest level of geography they are available at, you'll see that it shows that we've made good progress in that space. We are actually leading the way, and I think that's something to be celebrated in West Yorkshire. But we're not prepared to stop there. we continue to make investments, particularly around digital inclusion skills, including a recent investment working with our local authority partners to establish a digital skills coordinator role in each of the local authority districts. If I move on to the digital blueprint, this has really evolved from that digital skills plan that we've had, that was published in November 2022. It also builds on a previous iteration of a digital blueprint that was actually published way back in 2018. So as you'll see, a refresh is very timely. The digital blueprint aims to boost productivity, reduce skills gaps, improve our digital connectivity, and make West Yorkshire an attractive place for investment, but also to improve the lives of our residents. And if I just draw your attention to the matrix approach as an overview of that plan, which is on page 55 of your packs or page 7 of Appendix 1, you will see that the approach there is very much an integrated approach across all the different agendas that have an impact on digital across the 3 themes which run horizontal on that page across people and education, place, business and organisations, and then the verticals in terms of how we will take an approach to tackling digital exclusion, how we can benefit from advanced technologies, and how we can showcase all the digital opportunities that West Yorkshire has to offer. So the consultation on this blueprint today has been through a number of different committees, business stakeholder workshops and a public consultation which received 121 responses. And if the blueprint is endorsed here today by this committee, then it will be taken to the combined authority and published towards the summer. The members are asked to consider the 3 questions in relation to the digital blueprint. Do members feel that the digital blueprint is reflective of the digital skills needed in the region? Are the outcomes as they relate to people and education ambitious enough? And if they are not ambitious enough, how can we be bolder? And do you have any other further feedback? Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Is there anybody wanting to raise that? Because we are looking for endorsement of this today.
One of your intended outcomes is to raise or encourage more digital apprenticeship starts. Have you got, obviously that can be huge, have you got an idea of what that means in terms of digital apprenticeship starts? Do you know if the offer is robust enough in West Yorkshire in order for those starts to increase? Is it digital marketing? Is it coding and programmers? So have you done some analysis of what that means?
So I won't be able to answer your question in full, Alex, because I've not been part of, I'm representing the team that have put this together, but I'll certainly take it back. I do know that they are looking at developing an action plan, and they will be talking to stakeholders about how we can ensure those actions are delivered.
Just want to make sure it is challenging and ambitious enough.
Yeah.
So we can share that back to our members.
Tim.
I fear this is something that we should have fed in earlier to the process, but it has been in some ways a recurring theme. The contribution of HEIs to this agenda is sometimes, I think, conceived very narrowly around courses that are coded as being very specifically around computer science and related areas. Actually, digital skills at a high level are delivered in a range of different courses in higher education. A favourite example of mine is music technology. We have a large number of students studying music technology across West Yorkshire in a variety of different institutions. Not all of them, but many of them are developing very high-level coding skills as part of those qualifications. But obviously, the very specific coding that tends to get drawn on, coding in the sense of course coding that tends to get drawn on, doesn't necessarily represent that. It might be that helps us to frame an even more ambitious agenda around the higher level contribution to the agenda.
Thank you, Tim. Sonia.
Yeah, just to maybe build on Tim's point there, I think when you look at the matrix diagram with the advanced technology column going down, it's maybe trying to just unpick what does that mean. And I think in the context of where we are with generative AI and what will come next after that, I think we've got to be pretty ambitious at that high level in terms of really pushing forward to support our businesses with the right level of skills, because they're in such short supply, and even universities are finding it very difficult to get the skills we need to teach the skills at that level.
Are there any further comments? There was 3 points that Sonia made. Sorry, Tim.
Thank you. Sonia, in terms of what's in the plan, yeah, there's a set of outcomes in there for each of the areas. Are they already funded? Yeah, but I'm trying to just work out. Yeah, are they funded things, and do they have timescales, or are they ideas at this point that will need funding? Where are you at in that, Paul? Where does it sit?
Thank you for the question. The action plan is emerging. It's in development. I suspect there'll be a mixture of things across there. There'll be a mixture of things that are already happening. There'll be things that will be coming up for investment, and then there'll be things that we want to achieve as a partnership and do more in, like the apprenticeship space.
Nothing further. So there was three points there for the committee. You were to note the progress since the publication of the digital skills plan, particularly in the West Yorkshire Digital Inclusion Initiative. Also to endorse the digital blueprint and the current progress, and also delegate endorsement to the chair in the case of the outstanding feedback from members ahead of the final design. Okay. So we're going to move on to item 9, which is the adult skills year 2 data, on which I'm going to invite Peter Glover and Pippa Sayer.
Thank you, Chair. So the main focus of the adult skills paper is the AEB year 2 achievement, but I just wanted to give you a brief update on some other adult skills provision. Firstly, skills bootcamp. So since the papers were published, work has continued with our local authority colleagues to plan for more targeted skills boot camps in each of the local authority areas under Wave 5, which starts on the 1st of April. So in 2 areas, we've been asked to commission on their behalf based on their reported skills needs in their areas, and local authority colleagues are involved in the commissioning and monitoring of providers, with contracts held centrally with the combined authority. The other local authorities are opting to receive a grant from the combined authority to deliver direct skills bootcamp provision or to procure and manage the subcontracted providers. Through Skills Connect, there's been recent commissioning, some exciting non-accredited level 3 provision in digital, including digital marketing, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and a pilot on ethical use of artificial intelligence. There's also a West Yorkshire-wide procurement about to commence to support additional Wave 5 skills bootcamps, covering sector areas such as fabrication and welding, English for speakers of other language tutors, telecoms infrastructure, and project management. We're going to soon hear from Peter Glover about our end of year 2 adult education budget data, and it's hard to believe that AEB has only been devolved for 2 full years. The full report will be available in the coming weeks, which showcases the impact the West Yorkshire flexibilities and devolution is making. We must remember that impact on disadvantaged and more reluctant learners can take time to evidence, and pilots that we've put in place to learn from will support our future flexibilities. What is remarkable in the current climate, with costs increasing and an AEB allocation that hasn't increased, is that the number of learners has increased by 10% from year 1 to year 2. That's 4,160 more learners in West Yorkshire engaging in adult skills. In the main, the data shows an overwhelming positive picture in the support that adult education budget and free courses for jobs delivers to West Yorkshire residents. 47,000 residents have been supported to upskill through over 82,000 courses. And our partnership of local authorities, colleges and providers continues to work together to improve how we plan our provision and our relationships to ensure that learning programmes are accessible in over 450 locations across West Yorkshire, which ensures residents have local access to reduce barriers to participation. There is similarly an encouraging picture of the changes of prioritisation of the funding in Year 2. There's been an increased funding in more deprived areas and in priority areas, and more residents supported from those acutely disadvantaged areas. There's more diverse demographics engaged in learning, double the number of learners achieving their first level 3, and more people on a low wage are supported to upskill and increase learning in key sectors such as digital and engineering and manufacturing. The data has also highlighted where we can improve and areas that we can investigate further, such as improving collation of destinations, including wider social impact outcomes, and looking at the predominance of a younger demographic participating in AEB and how this links with youth unemployment. While the number of individuals supported with a learning difficulty or disability was maintained since Year 1, the number supported through learning support funding shows we've increased the number of learners supported above the West Yorkshire demographic average. I'll now pass over to Peter Glover, who will present some of our key Year 2 data.
Thanks, Pippa, and I have some more slides, and hopefully this is going to work. But you also have printed copies of the slides on your desks, sort of for reference. So what we thought might be useful is just to expand on some of Pippa's points with a quick presentation. Now the data is quite complex and multifaceted, but we've tried to keep it as simple as possible. So first of all, building what Pippa said around the overall scale of the programme. And what we're looking at here is all of the different strands combined together, including adult skills, community learning and free courses for jobs. So the overall number of distinct learners who were supported on AEB during 22-23 was 47,000, and that includes people who started learning in the previous year and were carried over into this year. And so we saw 10% growth, as Pippa mentioned, compared with the previous year. So the fastest rate of growth was in Wakefield, but the biggest net growth in absolute terms was seen in Bradford. And as you can see, strong growth in Kirklees and also growth in Calderdale and Leeds. So all local authorities shared in the growth that we've seen in the overall sort of scale of learners. So moving now to subject areas, how has that changed in the last couple of years? Again, we're looking at all strands of provision here, and we're looking at starts. So starts are actually courses that were started during the academic year, and learners quite often do more than one course. So the biggest area of year-on-year growth was preparation for life and work, as you can see, which is sort of dwarfs all the bits of other subject areas of the programme, and that includes all the basic skill elements, which I'm going to go into more detail in a moment. But the second biggest area of growth was information and communication technology, so 34% growth and 1,600 additional starts in 22-23. Then the next biggest area of growth was engineering and manufacturing, 530 additional starts and 35% growth. Now this is important because both of these areas are skill shortage, high demand areas, so it supports the objectives of the AB strategy to address those sorts of occupational areas. But we also did see some reduction in starts for some subject areas. Retail and commercial enterprise was lower, and as was health, public services and care. But health, public services and care is a very large subject area. So I mentioned basic skills. That is a key priority for the devolved programme, and you can see from this slide that there's been growth across the board in terms of the different types of basic skills provision. There was a total of 23,500 starts on basic skills courses during the year, and in fact 40% of all the adult skills provision in terms of starts was directed through basic skills. There was substantial growth in the number of basic skills starts in 22-23 compared with the previous year of 2,870 or 14%, and a lot of that was driven, that overall growth was driven by growth in ESOL, English for speakers of other languages, 1,700 net additional starts, 17% growth. And we've seen exceptional demand for that type of provision. Although, as you can see from the chart, there was growth across all the basic skills categories. So turning now to progression within adult education budget provision. So a key measure of the added value of AB is whether the extent to which learners are progressing within their learning. So this analysis focuses on learners who started a course at a higher level than their existing level of attainment or studied their first qualification. And overall, 45% of adult skills and free courses for job starts, or nearly 27,000 starts in absolute terms, provided that kind of progression for the learner during 22-23. So around more than 17,000 starts, or 29% of the total, were for learners who had no qualifications. As you can see the various levels and the extent to which progression was offered at those levels. You might notice at level 3 that the proportion is more than 80%. That reflects the eligibility criteria within AB for those level 3 courses. So with a few exceptions, people are eligible when they don't have an existing level 3. So turning to the employment status of learners, we're looking here at adult skills and free courses for jobs. Obviously, supporting the unemployed is a key priority for devolved AB. We saw 34,000 starts across those two strands for unemployed learners during 22-23. That's an increase of 3,000 on the previous year. So among learners who were unemployed and actively seeking work at the outset of their course, 53% experienced positive progression at the end of their course, i.e. they moved into employment or further learning, and that's amongst learners who had a known destination. So turning to the sort of diversity of the programme, Pippa mentioned that it is a highly diverse programme, and we can illustrate that with this focus on ethnicity. So a majority, 57% of new learners, so learners who started during 22-23, were from an ethnic minority group. You can see Asian and Asian British learners, and the most strongly represented, accounting for 26% of all learners on the programme, but Black, African Caribbean, Black British group accounts for 11%. So the 57% for 22-23 is an improvement or an increase on the 54% that we saw seen in the previous year, and also a further increase on the 46% in 2020-21. And then people also mentioned the extent to which learners are drawn from deprived neighbourhoods. What we're looking at here is a profile by local authority of learners in terms of their residence and whether they're from a deprived neighbourhood. So decile 1 is the most acutely deprived neighbourhoods through to 10, which is the least deprived. And it's worth noting that learners on AB provision or on adult skills provision attract a funding uplift to reflect the fact that they're disadvantaged, and the costs of recruiting and retaining them in learning are relatively high. So there were more than 18,000 learners, or 41% of the total, were recruited from the 10% most deprived neighbourhoods. So they are really the most acutely deprived neighbourhoods. And that is higher for both Bradford and Leeds. So for Bradford, it's 54% of learners. For Leeds, 50%. And that reflects that Bradford and Leeds have a wider prevalence of acute deprivation. What you can also see, though, is that Calderdale, Kirklees and Wakefield had higher proportions than Bradford and Leeds of learners in decile 2, which is still a high level of deprivation within those neighbourhoods. So turning finally to achievement data. So the overall volume of achievements delivered through the adult skills and free courses for jobs strands during 22-23 increased by 17% compared with the previous year. And as you can see from the chart, there was an increase at all levels in 22-23. You will also notice that the volume of achievements recorded in that year was, for both level 1 and level 2, was lower than in 2020-21, and that's a pre-Devo period. But you can see that there was substantial net growth at entry level and level 3. And the growth at those levels was enough to push the number of achievements higher, 5% higher in 22-23 than in to 21. The overall success rate for the adult skills programme in 22-23 was 87%, which is a slight increase on the figure of 86% recorded for the previous year. And then just some summary points, which I won't go through again. So back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any comments?
Very general comment, actually. I'd like to congratulate the team that's both for the results here, but also more generally. When I talk to people nationally, the overall rollout of the devolved adult skills budget has been managed better in West Yorkshire than I think anywhere else in the country.
Thank you.
I'd just like to echo the same comments that it's hugely positive. I'm quite interested to understand in terms of where you've recruited the diverse sort of audiences who've actually taken on these skills. Where did they come from?
So we do have the ability to sort of provide a very detailed mapping of where learners with different characteristics are recruited from. But as you can see, a big proportion of them are from those most deprived neighbourhoods. A lot of those are in the centre of Leeds and Bradford, but also spread more widely across West Yorkshire.
I think that's the almost the point I'm making. It's that they are the hardest to reach, and you manage to do it, and actually just capturing that and making sure that we take that forward is really important.
Thank you. Billy.
Hi, thanks. And thank you from me as well. Mainly around facilitating the funding for us to continue our TU Ed programme at Northern College. I reached out to people last year because that was ceased through Bradford. Bradford College decided no longer to deliver TU Ed education programme, which was union learning reps, shop stewards, health and safety reps, which are always important in workplaces, I think we'll agree. And people kindly agreed to fund that for West Yorkshire participants, so that's a really big thank you on our behalf. And we've run successfully 2 ULR courses and quite a lot of other TU Ed courses down there now, and we're looking to bring that up into West Yorkshire for delivery as well, so thank you very much. Just another point within that I'd like to have a chat with you about, Pippa, at some point, is around the digital skills and potentially looking to increase that with some work I'm doing with Leeds and Kirklees Local Authority trade unions. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any further comments? Okay, so thank you, Pippa, and thank you, Peter, for that report. Thank you. So we're moving on to the skills support for businesses, and I'll invite Michelle Burt.
Thank you very much. So this paper provides an update on activity to support employers in West Yorkshire to create a pipeline of talent, and also to encourage employer investment in skills. So the context here is really important. The context is around both labour shortages and skills shortages. So the context within which our employers are operating. So the labour market in West Yorkshire, we heard that at the beginning of this meeting, remains relatively tight. So we still have high demand for labour, and a lot of the work that this committee oversees is really about, and what the great work we just heard about is about increasing the size of that labour pool. So in West Yorkshire, we have far too many residents that are not in the labour pool at the moment. They don't have the skills, or there are other issues that prevent them from being able to work, and that has a direct impact on employers because they're competing for a talent pool, a labour pool that is too small. So a lot of the work that this committee does will benefit employers, as you know, the residents of West Yorkshire that we've just been hearing about are brought closer to and into the labour market. But we also have a labour market that experiences skill shortages, so both hard to fill vacancies and also people in roles that they're not fully capable of doing. And those kind of skills mismatches, so roles that are really difficult to fill because the skills just aren't out there, those are at an all-time high. And more than a third of the vacancies that we have in West Yorkshire are for that reason, because the people are either not interested in doing them or they're not out there with the skills to do them. And construction is top of the list of sectors that suffer from that challenge. But employers also face skills deficiencies within their existing staff as well. So employers also have people in role that can't fully achieve the role. The minority of employers use FE and HE institutions to address those issues. And most employers actually pay for training themselves via a myriad of private training providers and consultants and others. We have got specific challenges around higher skilled occupations. So we've picked out in the report digital, engineering and health areas, all of which are absolutely crucial to our economy. These are all also highly productive sectors. And highly skilled STEM workers, particularly in engineering, are really important if we're to achieve our ambitions around green transition, green economy. There is some funding available to co-invest with businesses to help address these issues. So in particular, we have secured funding to work with the FE sector in order to increase capacity, to respond to emerging skills, and just over £1.5 million to support emerging skills through co-investment with businesses. These amounts of money are modest, and we're really keen to get the thoughts of the committee about how those can best be co-invested in order to encourage the behaviours that we want to see by employers. There isn't the huge amounts of money that we'd need to deliver to subsidise or fully fund to address the challenges that I've addressed here. We need to see employers investing more particularly in emerging skills, and that's what we're really keen to start a conversation with you about. And we'll also be holding a session with the regional CBI to start thinking about how we can scope co-investment models for emerging skills. And so those were the questions that we wanted to ask and to leave with you. So there's just over £1.5 million to work with employers to support co-investment in emerging skills. So we're thinking particularly around digital and green.
Thank you. Are there any comments or anybody want to feed in? Natasha and then Jo.
Actually, it follows on to probably the next point in your report. That actually the Fair Work Charter, you might be able to, you'll be pushing on an open door with the people that are in there, and actually in the questionnaire for it, it asks if you are interested in helping to support and build a community, but it doesn't ask that specific question about the skills, so it could be useful to put that in just to capture that already keen audience.
Thank you, Jo.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go back to Wakefield because that's where I know. So in Wakefield, we have an issue with employers not wanting to train people because they'll leave, and that's part of the issue that we have of like trying to establish those relationships with employers in Wakefield. So one of our concerns over in Wakefield is because our higher education skills staff that do these and try and get people onto courses, they're on a short-term base plan, so the staff will be gone in a year or so, and then do we start from square one, and then we're recruiting those people, and we're going in a vicious circle of we're going round and round. When we're talking about having this framework to see what we can do, are we doing it across cities, or are we doing something? Are we piloting something in Wakefield and then piloting something different in Kirklees or something different in Leeds, and then seeing what is the best approach that way around, and something like that? Thank
you. So firstly, yes, there is absolutely an entrenched issue around low demand and low supply of skills in Wakefield, and that's the context within which we're operating here. So absolutely recognise that. And I think that your steer and your advice around potentially piloting an approach in a local authority is one that the committee might want to consider.
Tim?
I think for all HEIs, the single most powerful group of interventions in this sphere are around work placements, internships, structured engagements with the workplace. They're powerful partly because they do help build confidence on the part of employers and key individuals within organisations, build confidence in the opportunities that exist to work with HEIs. Obviously, I think we're all welcoming the news elsewhere in the papers around the Mayor's graduate scheme, but if you're looking for things to invest in, Michelle, in the HLS part of this field, and I guess that's particularly on green and digital, as you say, it would be to further extend those opportunities around placements, internships and other work-related engagements.
Thank you. Any further comments? So one of the comments, the funding should only be used as an offers if all offers have been explored with whoever we're offering funding to. We can't just say there's funding there, because there's not going to be a substantial amount of funding. So after all offers have been exhausted when they've looked elsewhere, and there's a potential for the overlap on the boot skills camp, is there? There could be a slight problem.
Well, I think that's a really good point, that skills boot camps are able to be positioned as a business facing offer in order to retrain or upskill people in with clear line of sight to jobs. So yes, you're absolutely right. We need to create, where we're looking at piloting interventions, they need to complement those existing offers.
Yeah, and I think it's key that you explore with the employers what the barriers are to the investment. Why, could be downtime, anything within that, setting. So, yes, Eleanor.
Thank you. This may be a bit too broad for this particular aspect of what we're looking at, but just thinking wider perspectives about, especially in engineering, degree apprenticeships and other approaches to encouraging people in and retaining them and keeping them in the area once they are trained up. But also looking earlier, how are we doing this in terms of careers, advice and support? Are we actually encouraging young people into these fields in the first place so that they know that these are options available to them? Thank you.
Milton.
Yeah, I would love to see the offer extended to social enterprises, CICs and voluntary sectors. It's a win-win-win, because if they can bring on some of these youngsters who want these kind of jobs, it helps build their capacity for more and more and more, and obviously that contributes more to the economy. So I'd love to see a deeper dive into CICs, voluntary sectors, social enterprise, and perhaps even sole traders, especially around construction.
Holly.
Just referring to something earlier on in this meeting, there's a couple of big funding streams that are long term that will fill skills gaps. Key one is apprenticeships, so we come back to how do we grow apprenticeships, how do we get more employers to take on more apprentices, because that will bring more funding into the area, and directly related to what employers need, because if employers take on more apprentices, they're taking on apprentices in the skills gaps that they need. So answering that question would be a significant long-term gain. I'll also refer back to the previous item on the agenda. I think that our performance regionally with the adult skills budget is excellent. How do we get a bigger slice of the cake that's available nationally into the adult skills budget, on the basis that, well, if we're spending it more effectively than all the other regions, can we get more of the cake?
I'm going to bring in Shirley then, Milton.
Just a point about the future lifelong learning entitlement and maybe getting on the front foot with that, because if we can be prepared to, I don't know how sensitised businesses are to that opportunity coming forward, but we should be helping them to be prepared and working with colleges and universities on that.
Just for
context, can I come back? Uh, so when I look around the country and look at the way that different areas are using their adult skills budget, you can find areas of the country where it's habitually underspent and that they incentivise providers in a number of ways to spend the money, which that's okay. I'm not going to criticise the colleges that have that extra money available on that incentive basis. But it's a bit frustrating when we've got waiting lists. The money could be distributed more logically and better nationally.
Thank you, Colin. Walter?
Yeah, the boot camps initiative, I think it's a great initiative, but what would have helped if we knew what organisations needed before it was rolled out? Because that's been the biggest frustration I've found, certainly working on what organisations need. There's a lot of skills out there, but what do they actually want? That hasn't been really made clear.
So, do you mean with the DFE commissioned boot camps? Yeah. So for committee members, the information, skills boot camps are a Department for Education initiative, but in devolved areas, the delivery is grant funded to combined authorities. But there's also national commissioning in parallel. So here in West Yorkshire, we do have both nationally commissioned and regionally commissioned boot camps. It is, which isn't hugely straightforward for employers to engage with. It is a key feature of the way that we've designed boot camps here in West Yorkshire, that there is clear line of sight to jobs. So guaranteed interviews, content designed in partnership with employers, and that is how to get strong progression outcomes. But a really important thing to do is to work with a range of size of businesses to articulate the need. And of course, it is much easier for larger employers that are recruiting high volumes to articulate their needs and for us to respond. So we're really keen to work with groups of SMEs, particularly at the smaller end, so that we can commission the provision that meets their needs. But you're absolutely right. The principle of what you're saying, that we need to fully understand what employers are looking for, help them to articulate what they're looking for, make sure there are real roles to apply for at the end, and that's where the strong progressions come from.
Okay. Did you want to come back, Milton?
Thanks for that. Thank you for that. I guess if we'd have known as well, we could have added quite a number of small social enterprises, CICs working together to create a pool of trainers and providers to work with the bigger the pool of SMEs and everything else. That's what really is the bugbear for me. We can't seem to move forward as a collective or as an ordinary social enterprise. But you made the point, and I just want to thank you for that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just get a bit of clarity? You mentioned that you had some funding that was for FE. Is that colleges or is that all organisations that deliver FE and skills?
So that is to be fully scoped and developed in consultation with the sector, but I'm using the broader definition as shorthand when I speak. Apologies for not being clear there. Sorry.
Is there any further comments? I think one of the things I've just taken from that is about listening to what the employer wants and their needs, and the freedom to choose a provider that fits their needs, whether it's accredited or non-accredited training. It's got to be working in partnership with the employer. Yeah. Okay, if there's no further comments, thank you, Michelle, for that comprehensive paper, and I think that concludes the business for the day. Thank you for your time.